All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. So welcome to Insights here. My name is Dan Howler, and I'll be taking you through this particular Insights presentation. As is common in the beginning, I'd like to point out that everything shared inside this particular presentation is not legally binding or prescriptive advice, and everything that can be found here is garnered through our experience or found online for any of the content on the slides. We're recording this and post it up on the website if anybody would like to grab it down later. As always, please feel free to chat into the window any kind of questions you might have. I'll answer them as I go, or we can definitely answer them towards the end. So the topic, overcoming the struggles of small practices. First of all, the way I'm going to do this is kind of break it down and show a few of the struggles up front, and then kind of go into some potential solutions. And I realize that with small practices, everybody's unique. Everybody has their own workflow. Everybody has their own thing. And especially when you get into some of the weird specialties that are out there, these are the more generic problems that affect a lot of folks. And then some solutions right after that. So yes, I'm not going to list every single problem that exists on the planet. We would be here all year. But this is going to give you a really good setup here for some of the things we'll talk about. So essentially, yeah, there's a lot of questions, a lot of challenges faced by the small groups that are out there today. There's a lot of consolidation. There's tons of uncertainty. The ACA is all over the place now, and everyone's in different stages of healthcare reform and implementing a software, needing to upgrade systems. Everything seems to be at times expensive, or can be. And so that's just a few of the original questions that a lot of folks have. And, you know, here's a good slide here about providers and staff, you know, not comfortable. If you're being acquired and you're going, almost everybody has been through at least one system change. If they haven't already implemented their first system, that's the biggest change. So it seems. Lots of stuff to be considered if you're coming up from paper about, you know, you used to have everyone's charts in their own area, and now we're centralizing them into one patient, one chart, or now you've got hardware limitations. You've always had on-site servers, and now you're thinking about moving to the cloud. You know, there's a lot of uncertainty there. And then, yeah, cost is generally speaking at the forefront of every small practice's conversations. A lot of times, if the money's flowing well, it seems like everything's going well, but if not, sometimes it can be difficult. And yeah, there's privacy concerns as well as far as implementing these online systems. A random slide that I found as far as some of the initial, and these are some of the older, before people were adopting medical records, some of the perceived problems and whether or not they were you know, life and death as viewed by different clients. So that's a nice little screen there. But yeah, again, it's a lot of the same stuff as far as the fears that everyone has with taking an EHR. And you know, as I mentioned earlier, independent practices. I mean, it's basically sweeping the country. It used to be in regions, and now it's pretty much nationwide as far as hospital groups and HMOs just following up these independent practices. And got a few stats for you on the screen there regarding, you know, reports showing 18% of physicians work in a solo practice, down from 24 in 08, and I think that was the 2011 stat, and it's probably continued downward from there. But there's no question that you know, and that happens for a lot of reasons, and why the decline here. And so, you know, there's plenty of reasons why that might happen, some good, some bad, but generally speaking, it is because of a lot of the regulatory stuff going on. There's tons of new burdens that are on the administrative staff, and you really, that good business knowledge, a good small practice really has to run streamlined and have strong leadership, or you know, that can really decline. So again, lots of issues. And to continue with that, you know, government mandates, et cetera, PQRS penalties, my goodness, if you haven't already, gotten on board by July 1st with a lot of those, penalties. If you have to do I think you have to do 50, whatever, depending on the measures you choose, you have to have at least 50% compliance over the entire year of reporting. So you have to install those at least 3 measures by July 1st and do 100% compliance to land that 50% over the course of the year to essentially avoid that penalty. And so if you're a 3 or 4 doc group with, 20,000 visits a year, that PQRS penalty can definitely be in the tens of thousands. So, and other things that are also on everyone's mind, let alone penalties, is the daunting concept to rolling out ICD-10 and everything that comes with that. So, essentially, this is probably the question on most folks' mind these days is, what am I going to do as a small practice? Am I going to be acquired? Am I going to acquire other folks and grow, or am I going to make myself strong enough to survive? So for the purposes of the next couple slides that we talk about some of the solutions, we're going to assume that the third bullet point here, how do I make myself strong enough to survive? We'll talk about some of the different things that a small practice might do to sort of help navigate these choppy waters. So solutions, we've spent 10 minutes talking about the problems. Let's talk about some of the solutions that are out there. And I'm going to start off at the high level things, and everybody's in different stages of these problems. But we want to talk about high level what you can do if you're looking to sort of step into the market. And then we'll start talking about things that you can do if you've already sort of got a software and you're looking to become more efficient, things like that. So essentially, and this is failing to plan, planning to fail. What is the old adage? If you're looking to finally get off paper and get into this thing, obviously, you'll want to do, I call it the due diligence here, of working with your vendors and consultants to try to figure out what everything's going to cost you, and really you have to keep in mind the SaaS model, the software as a service model, as you intend to purchase. Make sure you know almost all interfaces and license fees come with these maintenance costs, and they're some percentage of your total fee or whatever. And so it's not just that upfront cost. There's definitely recurring fees that are involved there. So understand what those are, what those mean, and what that means as far as what you can afford. Seems like a no-brainer, probably skipped by most folks. They just know they have to do it, and so they assume it as much. And then, also, try to do the due diligence on your understanding your patient mix, grants, etc., and we'll talk more about that here in a moment. Maximize, and then basically reaching out to your recs and any other consultants as needed. So that's sort of, high-level stuff. I'm sure everyone's doing it, but some might not be, and it's definitely something you don't want to skip. Exactly. Okay. So, if you're a small practice, one good idea, again, at the very high level, is talk to folks that are like you. See what they're doing. A lot of people, probably do that over lunch, and it's mostly gossip. But if you can actually go, and you could literally do a site visit if you wanted to and see what they're doing. But essentially, most groups that are like you are probably unique in their own way as well. And so a site visit might not necessarily get you what you need as far as what would fit you. However, if you've got a similar size specialty and they're willing to talk, see what they use. What software did they buy? What types of challenges did they overcome, and how they financed it? Leverage your external resources. So essentially, I don't know a single software vendor these days that won't work with you on the price of your license if you're looking to buy one. Especially when you throw out caveats and carrots that, hey, I've got another group I'm looking to, they're looking as well, just like me, maybe we can go in on a group discount, something like that. There's almost always some form of negotiation power that you can install, and sometimes it definitely, sadly, it's hard to hear this, but the more you buy, the more discount you can get. That's usually a good way to do it if they're not budging on price. If you purchase more, they can give you a bigger discount, especially if you have to do some of these things if you're going for the meaningful use stages and you need to get a portal, for example, for stage 2. That's usually an extra fee. Things like that, you can kind of negotiate that buying power. So essentially, try to find friends and do just exactly that. And then, yeah, as far as surviving, you know, if you're really having workflow trouble or you don't have space in your office, a lot of times it's like you'll be a cardio or an orthopedic group that literally has nowhere to put a vital signs machine because our office is so small. You got some poor patient standing out in the hallway, standing on a scale. You know, go see what other people are doing and how they're kind of handling that, and you'll often find really nice solutions in that regard. So let's say that you have talked to folks, you know, you've kind of gone through your due diligence of meeting with everybody and seeing how they're doing it and getting your discount. Well, now that you finally do that, choose the right product. You know, don't just get something because it's a good deal. Make sure it actually does what you want it to do. The last thing you want to do is purchase a software that really causes you to take a step back, even though it might seem, if you already have purchased a product, that happened. The most expensive EMR is the one you replace, so they say. At the end of the day, if you choose one that may or may not be more expensive than what you'd like to pay, but it actually fits your needs, you're going to find that the cost savings of that to produce a workflow that makes sense actually puts you ahead in that situation. And then, yeah, I've got a piece in here about how to essentially negotiate with your vendors. So once you do choose the right software, it can help to also use some technology when you do so. A lot of the times this software, these EHRs that have survived the reform mandates these days, and it used to be 150 EHRs out there, and now there's 30. Essentially, you know, we kind of use approximately 20% of the actual total bandwidth that these things are able to do. And so actually investing in the training time and not skimping on that training is hugely important. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a scenario where people will shell out the cash to buy an actual EHR and then not want to spend time on training, on spending money on actually getting their people trained. It blows my mind. But that actually happens. People think, you know, okay, we'll just skimp on training and kind of limp along. Well, what you do is you do exactly that. You develop a limp, and you don't use the software the right way. And then a year and a half later, a consultant walks in the door and says, oh, yeah, you didn't know you could do this, and then all of a sudden, you know, your life becomes 10 times easier. Well, if you were trained correctly in the first place, a lot of that stuff can be avoided, which I realize how broad and obvious that seems, but you can make a use case to training your people right the first time. That's definitely a way to go. All right. So another thing you'll hear a lot, and we're going to get to some examples here in a minute on some stuff you can actually do, so please hang in there. You'll hear treat the practice as a business, and of course a business that must profit. Essentially, a lot of people forget this, but you're out there competing with the big boys, and that means sometimes doing the things that they do. You know, they have a lot of, you know, weekend evening hours, and maybe you can hire some flex workers essentially to make something like that happen, offer that extra little convenience to the patients that some of the other bigger players do. You can attract more patients that way. Find inexpensive ways to market the practice. That's a big challenge. You can't exactly litter a zip code with flyers because how many patients are you actually going to touch as far as the ones, you know, the targeting is very difficult. So, and to do that is very expensive. So what are some good options? You know, social media, sure. That's fashionable to say. But what's a good example? So I've got one. A lot of groups don't, you know, a lot of groups have nonprofit organizations tied to the environment, whether it be charity or related or not. And one thing you can do to draw attention to something like that is use Google Grants. Google Grants is a free, you can actually get $10,000 a month if you have a 501c3 that's associated, you know, alongside your provider's practice. If you have that, you can get pay-per-click money, $10,000 a month pay-per-click money, so you will be at the top of Google if someone is searching for a given keyword that you define. and that is free money. I've done it a couple times. I did it to a group, and I did to a YMCA, local community work, but I've actually seen that work. You go to Google, you just search Google Grants, it'll be the first thing that comes up, and you fill out the paperwork. I know you have to have the articles, you know, the incorporation identifiers or whatever, but essentially you fill all that in, and then you basically get 10 grand a month in an account for you to run pay-per-click dollars with. So if you attract more and more folks to that nonprofit organization, a lot of the times that's directly related to brand exposure for your current office. So it goes hand in hand with helping both causes. So Google Grants is big. Highly recommend anybody that's in that position to take advantage of that. You'll want to train staff to do multiple jobs. So this is very common in small practice, to where I decide that my MA is going to wear about 3 hats and be, you know, answering the phones and then rooming patients, and then maybe doing some scheduling checkout. I mean, you'll have one person up there just running around, you know, and if you don't want to burn people out, but if you can, you want to cross-train as much as possible. You have to do that for vacations and holidays and covering the staff, but a lot of folks, you know, it can be a political environment there, and you definitely don't want to upset the balance. But if you can cross-train people as much as you can, that obviously helps ease the burden at times. And then the patient portal, if you have one, I know, again, they are costly at times, but especially if you can allow patients to communicate that way and maybe schedule their own appointment, pay their bill, whatever you can do to reduce the burden on the staff is ideal. And trust me, there's usually more than one portal option for your software. I know it's fashionable when you're talking to folks, say it's the only way is this right here. You have to go through this software. Well, there's usually another one, and it's usually certified and okay. So maybe ask around and see what your options are there for a portal. If for nothing else, it makes you look like you're in the 21st century, and some of your newer patients that are flooding in will hang around and come back as a result. Treat the practice as a business. All right, so obviously with all of the meaningful use stuff going on out there, it is very, very difficult to, or it can be difficult rather, to hit some of these stages to get this incentive money. Everyone seems to be spending a lot, although it can be difficult to, you know, you don't want to spend that much just to get whatever stage you're in's reward. Just if you're a 1 or 2 dot group, it almost at times can be cost prohibitive. So what do you do? And essentially, one way that's nice is that if you can, there's a lot of exemptions out there that can have you overcoming some of those more difficult measures that are out there. And they can get very, very obscure. It's things you might not necessarily know, depending on your situation, your patient mix, etc. They can be very very different. But the most common, of course, I've got listed here about the infrastructure and the uncontrollable circumstances. I mean, that certainly is up for discussion, as it were. A lot of these are. You know, a good example of that infrastructure one, if you've got if you do any group housing or something for your patient mix, you know, like a behavioral health type atmosphere, and that particular housing doesn't have a T100 line on it or something for internet, you can actually claim an exemption for one of those measures. Well, you would never have known that had you not read up on it or consulted a subject matter expert or a rec or a consultant or whatever. But essentially, there's plenty of exemptions out there, so get out there and find out what they are. I mean, it's free money laying out there as far as that's concerned. Highly recommend that. Form exemptions. Interfaces. So this is kind of near and dear to my heart. Interfaces always have this view of being very expensive up front, and nobody wants to pay for them. That's it. And they take forever to do it. And you always have somebody with a nightmare story about interfaces. But trust me, interfaces have been around for a long time. People are getting better at them. There's standards out. I know they still change on a somewhat regular basis. Someone's always trying to create a new type of an interface to trade data a different way. But the Health Level 7 standards, HL7, will be around and supported for a long time. you really need to get a lab interface and or a document interface installed if you find yourself doing a ton of scanning. If you're a small group and you do a lot of referring next to a big hospital or of any kind, they probably send you a ton of paper every day, and you are forced to scan that in. So let's talk labs first. Obviously, lab interfaces. I mean, there's a ton of lab scanning going on, prelims and finals. If you can just get that stuff, you know, interface, essentially the paper goes away. It frees up that person's time. God forbid you get into the discrete data mode and you can actually see some trending across your patient care. Take advantage of that big data. But of course, it reduces scanning time. But the document interface piece, once people deploy it, is almost better because you'll get tons of stuff that come in across that across the fax regarding a document interface. And it can, and what will happen is you'll get one that says, you know, okay, here's an H&P, and I need to scan it in for this rendering provider, but I want you to CC this other provider. So even though you have a document interface, or you might scan it in today, you still have to scan it in again for another provider if you go send it all over to them. So it's almost like they do duplicate work. Well, if you have the means, and it depends on the software and the interface's capability to automate that CC as well, you can actually cut out 2 steps and multiple stages of scanning here. So we're moving into the scanning world here, ladies and gentlemen. We're moving towards the future. Automation, think automation, think interfacing. It will save you time, FTEs, plenty of time. And generally speaking, these lab vendors will pay for the interface. You know, I know there's, they only like to do it in certain cases, or they only like to do it if the volume's high enough. But I tell you what, it's a situation where everyone's converting to these things, and they'd like to get everybody up on one software. So I think they're being more and more lenient with picking up the tab on these things these days. If you haven't done a lab interface for whatever reason, certainly reach out to your vendor and see if they're ready for it and if they'll cover it. And then document interfaces will also be, if the sending facility can support it, some kind of Meditech systems. I mean, everybody can pretty much interface with Meditech as well. So a lot of those hospitals, but essentially just get that done. Look into what's possible. All it takes a phone call. Just call somebody up and figure that out. It will be worth it in the long run. Here's another one, and this is, I actually put numbers to this because I wanted to show it. The automated patient reminders. So lots of folks have this. I don't know why the dentist office seems to be leading the way in this type of reminding a patient before their appointment. A lot of times people will just pay to have a person sit there and call and remind people and all of the above, and that can mean, you know, a full-time employee almost if they're calling, you know, 70, 80 patients a day to remind them before the, you know, C3 doc group session comes in the morning. If you're not doing that, if you're not reminding them at all, you probably have a no-show ratio that is relatively high. I've got a case study here for a small office, and by the way, when I say appointment reminders, I'm talking about the, you know, automated, the, like, you know, phone tree televised, so I'll plug them really quick, but essentially, you know, they have the automated phone call that you get or a text message that you get a couple days before your appointment to remind you. It's supposed to cut down on no-shows. So here was a group, and their average cost of a visit was $90, and they paid their doc $62.50, and so if there was ever a no-show, $150 was the cost essentially to the office. You know, 3 or 4 doc group had about 25,000 patient visits in a year, so very conservative here, and a 19% no-show rate. So of every 10 patients that were due to come in, they'd have, you know, 2 or 3. Every 20 patients on a day, they'd have 3 or 4 not come in. And so that was costing them, you know, over the course of a year, 4,700 no-shows. At the 152 was a staggering $750,000 for that office. You think about that, that is a real figure that you just can't see. Your day-to-day, you get lost in it. And so essentially, if you include appointment reminder system, which is cheap, and I think it's a penny for or a couple pennies, or 8 cents or 9 cents for a reminder, that, you know, essentially it could boil down to, you know, $100 and $150 a month or something, like you could find that in a couch. But essentially, if you can get that no-show rate from 19% down to 4%, just dropping at 4%, so the no-show reduction went from 19% to 15%, and that kicks out about a $90,000 savings, which is that 1,000 visits times the $90 for the visit cost, because you're paying that provider salary no matter what. So essentially, that, I mean, it is a absolute no-brainer to get an automated reminder system. Most places do have it, and so it's probably moot to them. But if you've got somebody sitting there calling, are they making $90,000 a year? Probably not. You could repurpose that employee to do absolutely anything else inside your office. That's just one of the more actual cost-saving examples that I like showing. So to wrap this up, essentially, those are some high-profile impacts that we plan on seeing during this year. There are, as I stated in the beginning, tons of pressures coming with just a limited time frame to get all this stuff done, and it's unclear whether all this stuff is going to be for the better or for the worse, but obviously making a plan, following through, and doing some of the tips shown today will help you survive the treacherous 2014 year. Again, this isn't everything that a practice might see, but just some of the things that we've seen so far that really help small practices in their struggle to survive here. That's all I've got. I will open it up to any questions that have been anybody might have throughout. Oh, I don't. It's all right. I've recorded this. I'll post it up on the website. If anybody has any questions or anything they want to bring up, we have any ideas about any unique scenarios you've got, and any ideas you want to bounce off us as to something we might be able to help with, feel free to email us here on the screen, and we can help as best we can. Besides that, thanks everybody for joining, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.